Hi, Cole here from Storytelling with Data. Once upon a time, I was making a presentation for a project I'd recently completed. I filled a slide with bulleted text, all the details my audience needed to know, summarized on a single page. When I got to the meeting, I displayed this slide. As I started reading aloud, I became puzzled. Seemed some people had tuned out entirely. Others, I could see their eyes scanning across the screen, reading ahead on their own. Hmm, this certainly isn't what I intended. Have you ever experienced that before? Perhaps you've made a slide similar to the one I described, or sat as an audience member when this was the unfortunate path that the presenter followed. It's a common scenario, and it's one that I hope to help you avoid when you're the one creating and delivering presentations. Today, we are going to transform the teleprompter slide.
So notice that your first inclination is to start reading this slide. In fact, you're probably reading it now instead of listening to me talk, right? So I'll take that away so that can't happen. You were probably just reading that slide instead of listening to me talk. And that's the problem. When we put that much text in front of our audience, they're either going to want to read it or they're going to get overwhelmed by the density of it and turn their attention onto something else. And now it doesn't mean there's no use for a slide that looks like that. Actually, the perfect use case for a slide like that is when we are sending something off that is meant to be consumed on its own. In that scenario, we're not there to lend additional detail or speed up or slow down or go into more depth or less depth on something. The materials have to do all of that for us. So in that case, a slide that's as detailed as what we just looked like might make sense. It does not, however, work pretty much no matter what you do to it in a live setting. In a live setting, there are a couple of different variations that we could consider employing. One would be we keep the teleprompter style slide, we just make it really short and pithy. Because if we're there live, we don't need all of that detail written down. We should know that detail. That should be the verbiage that we're able to lend as we talk through. But we may still want a prompt so that we don't forget anything critical to keep us on track. And so in this case, I've actually taken each of those bullets on the left-hand side and just turned them into short, pithy titles that can remind me what I want to talk through. They can help anchor the audience with where we're at within steps that I want to cover. And then the detail becomes speaking notes. And that's what I talk through in the session. For example, if we're actually putting this into practice, I wouldn't just show those 5 bullets at once. I would animate them. I could start with 5 simple ingredients. Our best-selling classic Trix Trail mix just has 5 ingredients: macadamia nuts, almonds, cashews, dried cherries, and dark chocolate chunks. I could go through each of these one by one, lending detail as I do. This works pretty well in person because the slide stays fairly static. There's just a few words that come up. So there's a little bit of motion to capture people's attention, but people's attention will mostly be on me as I'm presenting and I'm using my body and my hands and I'm moving around the physical space and I'm getting loud to emphasize important things or quiet to get people's attention back if I've lost it. And I can use myself, right, as the presenter when it comes to playing a critical role for keeping people's attention, watching faces to understand where maybe something isn't landing well so that I can ask questions or go into more detail. The slide I just showed, though, doesn't work great in a virtual environment. And it's just because, as you see here, you only see a small screen of anything at a given time. And so when that screen stays static or pretty static, it's easier to tune out and get distracted by something else, right? Maybe you have your email window open and you see another email come in and that motion grabs your attention. So what I want to think about doing is, well, how might we build that sort of thing into our materials directly? So there's enough going on with the materials, not so much that it's distracting, but enough that we're able to keep people's attention because they know they don't want to tune out because they might end up missing what comes next. So we saw one strategy, right? Put it into pithy short phrases. Another strategy would be to break each of those five things up into separate slides. And it still is a prompt for me to know what to talk through next, right? To help keep myself on track. But it's also something reinforcing for my audience to look at that doesn't require too much reading, right? So it's not competing for attention, but rather reinforcing what we're going through. So that could look something like this. Our classic trail mix has just 5 simple ingredients: whole macadamia nuts, almonds, cashews, dried cherries, dark chocolate chunks. Turns out those macadamia nuts are pretty important. People love them. They're sort of the mainstay of our mix. And when we switched from macadamia nut pieces to whole macadamia nuts, we saw sales skyrocket as a result. However, there's recently been a nearly 40% price increase in macadamia nuts. It's due to some blossom blight that's been happening in the crops of one of the major Hawaiian producers. So today, we want to take you through our taste test study we've done to assess some alternative mixes that replace those whole macadamia nuts, and then use that to frame a discussion about where you want to go from here. Instead of the teleprompter, think about in a live setting when you have the benefit of being in the room with the other people. You might just use short, pithy phrases to keep yourself on track and keep others on track with where you are in what you're going through. Take it a step further, right? This works in a room with other people or especially well in the virtual setting, where, as I mentioned, having the screen changing up as you're talking through things can be a way to keep people engaged. You can break those points into multiple slides. So they still act as your sort of teleprompter, right, in terms of your reminder of what you wanted to cover next. But then you can break things up in a way that you can lend additional detail with your voice.